The lunch rush at Fort Davidson's mess hall brought its usual chaos of clattering trays and overlapping conversations. Staff Sergeant Chun surveyed the crowded room from his position near the serving line, chest swelling with authority as he spotted uniform infractions among the junior enlisted. 3 soldiers at the corner table had rolled their sleeves incorrectly, while another displayed his name tape at a slight angle that made Chin's jaw tighten with disapproval. Private Rodriguez and Sergeant Mills flanked Chun as he launched into his daily lecture about military bearing. The sergeants are supposed to maintain standards, Chin declared, gesturing broadly at the assembled troops. These kids think they can wear the uniform however they want, but discipline starts with appearance. Mills nodded his agreement while Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the familiar pattern of Chin's mounting frustration. The mess hall doors opened to admit a woman in standard battle dress uniform, her appearance unremarkable except for the quiet confidence in her stride. Colonel Sarah Martinez moved through the serving line without drawing attention, her subdued patches and modest bearing suggesting nothing more than another officer grabbing lunch. Her desert tan boots showed wear from field time, and her uniform displayed the practical creases of someone who worked rather than posed. Chin's attention snapped to the newcomer as she passed within 10 feet of his position. His eyes narrowed on her left sleeve, where a subdued patch displayed symbols he couldn't immediately identify. The fabric appeared genuine military issue, but something about the design struck him as irregular, possibly unauthorized. His confidence surged as he recognized what seemed like a clear violation happening directly under his supervision. "Excuse me," Chin called out, his voice carrying across the immediate area with unmistakable authority. The woman turned calmly, her expression neutral as she acknowledged his summons. Chin stepped forward, Mills and Rodriguez trailing behind as he closed the distance. "You need to explain that patch on your sleeve," he demanded, pointing directly at the insignia in question. "That doesn't look regulation to me." Martinez regarded the sergeant with steady eyes, her voice calm and measured when she responded. "The patch is regulation, Sergeant." Chin's face flushed red as his authority was questioned in front of witnesses. The nerve of this person challenging his expertise about uniform standards sent his anger spiking toward dangerous levels. "No, it's not regulation," Chin snapped back, his voice rising enough to draw stares from nearby tables. "I've been in this army for 12 years, and I know every authorized patch. You're wearing something you shouldn't have, and I won't tolerate stolen valor on my watch." Without waiting for further response, Chin reached out and grabbed the patch, his fingers closing around the fabric with enough force to tear it partially from Martinez's sleeve. The sharp sound of ripping material cut through the ambient noise like a gunshot. Conversations halted at tables throughout the mess hall as hundreds of eyes turned toward the confrontation. Sean held up the torn patch like evidence in a court-martial, his voice booming across the now silent space. "This is exactly what's wrong with our military today. People think they can wear whatever they want, make up their own rules, pretend to be something they're not." He waved the fabric above his head, ensuring every person in the mess hall could see his prize. Martinez said nothing. She looked down at her torn sleeve, then back at Chin's triumphant expression, her face betraying no emotion. The complete silence stretched for several heartbeats as 200 people watched the standoff unfold. Finally, she turned away from Chun and walked calmly to the serving line, collected her meal with methodical precision, and found an empty table in the far corner. Private Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he watched the scene conclude. Something about the woman's composure struck him as deeply wrong. Not the reaction of someone caught in deception, but the patience of someone choosing not to respond. Sergeant Mills whispered his congratulations to Chun for handling the situation properly, while civilian contractor Janet Walsh observed from her table near the windows, her expression troubled by what she'd witnessed. Chin tucked the torn patch into his pocket with satisfaction, already planning how he would document this incident in his report. The mess hall gradually returned to normal conversation levels as people processed what they'd seen, But Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that Chun had just made a catastrophic mistake. Private Rodriguez couldn't shake the image of the woman's calm face as he walked back to his barracks that afternoon. Something about her reaction bothered him in ways he couldn't articulate to his bunkmate. Most people caught in uniform violations either got defensive or apologetic, but she'd shown neither response. The torn sleeve and her measured silence replayed in his mind as he tried to focus on equipment maintenance. Meanwhile, Staff Sergeant Chin basked in the congratulations of his peers at the NCO club that evening. Sergeant Mills bought him a beer, while Chun recounted the confrontation with growing embellishment. "I put that faker right in her place," Chun declared to the assembled group. "Walked right up, called her out, and ripped that phony patch clean off." Mills nodded enthusiastically, adding his own observations about the woman's suspicious behavior and obvious deception. The next morning, Chun strode into Captain Torres's office with the torn patch in hand and righteous anger fueling his report. "Sir, we have a serious security breach on this base," he announced, placing the fabric on Torres's desk like crucial evidence. This civilian was walking around in uniform with unauthorized insignia, probably stolen valor. Torres picked up the patch, examining the subdued design with growing confusion as the symbols seemed familiar yet unplaceable. Chun provided a detailed account of the confrontation, emphasizing his decisive action and professional handling of the situation. The woman refused to provide proper identification and became belligerent when confronted about the fake patch, he explained. "I had no choice but to physically remove the unauthorized insignia to prevent further security violations." Torres noted the woman's name as Martinez, but didn't immediately recognize its significance among the hundreds of personnel moving through Fort Davidson daily. Colonel Martinez spent her morning visiting various departments across the base, her clipboard filled with detailed observations about everything from security protocols to equipment readiness. The motor pool sergeant noticed her thorough examination of vehicle maintenance records, but assumed she was conducting a routine audit. Her questions about response times and emergency procedures seemed standard for any quality assurance review. At the post exchange that afternoon, Chin encountered Martinez again near the uniform sales section. His confidence swelled as he approached, emboldened by the previous day's success and the support of his fellow NCOs. Still shopping for authentic patches, he asked loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Maybe try the surplus store off base where they sell the real ones." Martinez continued browsing without acknowledging his presence, her focus apparently absorbed by comparing different items on the shelves. Chin's voice grew louder as he addressed the other customers in the store. "Everyone needs to be careful about people impersonating military personnel," he announced. "Yesterday, I had to remove fake insignia from this same individual. It's our duty to protect the integrity of a uniform." Two junior enlisted soldiers overheard his proclamation and glanced nervously between Chun and Martinez, sensing an uncomfortable tension they couldn't fully understand. Civilian contractor Janet Walsh observed the exchange from the magazine rack, her memory nagging at her about something familiar in Martinez's bearing and appearance. She'd worked with military personnel for 15 years across multiple installations, developing an eye for recognizing different ranks and specialties. Something about Martinez triggered a recognition she couldn't quite grasp, like trying to remember a name on the tip of her tongue. Chin returned to his office and began drafting a formal incident report about what he termed a security breach involving unauthorized personnel. His typed account described Martinez as a potential infiltrator who had gained access to Fort Davidson through unknown means and was conducting surveillance while impersonating military personnel. He recommended immediate investigation and enhanced security measures to prevent similar incidents. Captain Torres received the formal complaint by late afternoon, noting Chin's detailed timeline and specific allegations about Martinez's suspicious activities. The report's tone struck Torres as unusually aggressive, but Chin's 12-year record and reputation for attention to detail lent credibility to his concerns. Torres decided to forward the complaint through proper channels while beginning his own preliminary inquiries. That evening, Martinez walked the base perimeter during her off-duty hours, mentally cataloging everything from guard post procedures to fence line security. Her trained eye spotted numerous deficiencies that would find their way into her comprehensive assessment report. The setting sun cast long shadows across the installation as she completed her circuit, her notebook filled with observations that would soon reshape Fort Davidson's operations in ways the current personnel couldn't imagine. Rodriguez lay in his bunk that night, still troubled by the mess hall incident and Chen's continued harassment of the mysterious woman. His instincts told him something was deeply wrong about the entire situation, but his rank and experience provided no framework for understanding what he'd witnessed. The torn patch in Martinez's dignified silence haunted his attempts to sleep, suggesting consequences he couldn't yet foresee. Captain Torres arrived at his office early the next morning with Chen's formal complaint weighing heavily on his mind. The allegations seemed serious enough to warrant immediate investigation, so he logged into the base personnel system and searched for Martinez's access records. Her name appeared in the database with standard entry timestamps, but the associated details struck him as unusually sparse for someone spending multiple days on the installation. Base security received Torres's request for credential verification within the hour. Staff Sergeant Kelly pulled Martinez's file from the digital archives, finding all proper authorization codes and clearance levels clearly documented. Everything appeared completely legitimate from a procedural standpoint, yet Kelly noticed the minimal personal information and restricted access flags that suggested someone with higher classification than typical base visitors. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Sergeant Mills spotted Martinez entering the communications center that afternoon. Mills knew from his own experience that the communications facility required special clearance that even senior NCOs couldn't obtain without specific mission requirements. He watched through the fence as Martinez moved through the security checkpoint without escort, the guards waving her through with casual familiarity that suggested routine access. Private Rodriguez was cleaning vehicles near the motor pool when fragmentary radio chatter caught his attention. The dispatcher mentioned something about Phoenix requesting helicopter availability, but the transmission cut off before Rodriguez could hear more details. The call sign meant nothing to him, yet something about the timing felt connected to recent events in ways he couldn't articulate. Chen's harassment campaign intensified when he noticed Martinez walking toward the motor pool complex around midday. He abandoned his administrative duties and followed her across the parking area, determined to document what he perceived as continued infiltration attempts. His confidence grew as he approached, emboldened by the formal complaint already filed and his conviction about catching an imposter. "You don't have authorization to be in this area," Chen announced loudly as Martinez examined a row of tactical vehicles. Motor Pool Sergeant Henderson looked up from his maintenance checklist, immediately recognizing Chen's confrontational tone and the potential for another incident. Martinez turned calmly toward Chen, her expression neutral as she acknowledged his presence without displaying any defensive reaction. "I'm conducting authorized inspections," Martinez replied quietly, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Henderson studied her bearing and speech patterns, noting the automatic confidence that marked career officers. Definitely officer material, he thought, though her subdued uniform provided no obvious rank indicators following the previous day's patch removal. Chen's voice rose as he demanded Martinez produce written authorization for her presence in the motor pool. Henderson watched the confrontation unfold, recognizing that Martinez carried herself with the composure of someone far senior to Chen's staff sergeant rank. Her calm responses and measured reactions suggested military experience that extended well beyond what any infiltrator could successfully imitate. The tension broke when Martinez simply walked away from Chen's demands, continuing her systematic examination of vehicles and equipment. Henderson returned to his work while Chen stormed off, muttering about security violations and inadequate base protection. The motor pool returned to normal operations, but Henderson made a mental note to mention the incident to his supervisor. Martinez's afternoon visit to the flight line created another subtle anomaly that escaped most observers. The air crew members noticed her approach and snapped to an unusual level of attention without offering salutes, their behavior suggesting recognition of authority they couldn't quite place. Staff Sergeant Jackson studied her face carefully, certain he'd encountered her somewhere in his previous assignments, but unable to make the connection. Captain Torres spent hours that evening attempting to verify Martinez's status through the personnel database, but each inquiry hit increasingly restrictive access barriers. Standard verification procedures that normally provided comprehensive information instead returned minimal details with classification warnings. The system's responses suggested Martinez possessed clearance levels that required higher authorization to review. His frustration mounted as routine background checks produced error messages indicating insufficient access privileges. Torres had never encountered such extensive restrictions for a simple personnel verification, leading him to wonder what kind of position Martinez actually held. The security barriers seemed designed for protecting information about someone with extraordinary authority or sensitive assignments. Meanwhile, Chen documented his second confrontation with Martinez in a supplemental report that emphasized her continued presence in restricted areas. His account portrayed her behavior as increasingly suspicious and recommended immediate detention pending proper identification. The formal language couldn't disguise his growing obsession with proving Martinez was an infiltrator. Private Rodriguez finished his evening duties with nagging doubts about Chen's crusade against the mysterious woman. Her calm demeanor and obvious comfort on the base suggested someone with legitimate authority, while Chen's increasingly aggressive behavior seemed disproportionate to any actual security threat. The fragments of radio chatter mentioning Phoenix echoed in Rodriguez's memory as he prepared for sleep. Base Security Chief Lieutenant Colonel Barnes reviewed the accumulating reports about Martinez with growing interest. The combination of legitimate access credentials, restricted database information, and unusual behavioral patterns created a puzzle that defied simple explanation. Barnes decided to personally review surveillance footage from Martinez's time on base, hoping to understand what was actually happening under his watch. The pieces of an emerging crisis scattered across Fort Davidson like fragments waiting for someone to recognize the pattern. Chen's conviction about catching an imposter drove him toward increasingly dangerous confrontation, while the institutional machinery slowly awakened to the possibility that something far more significant was unfolding than anyone had initially realized. Captain Torres placed his call to the base personnel office first thing Thursday morning, hoping to resolve the Martinez situation through proper channels. Major Kim answered on the second ring, her voice professional until Torres mentioned the name Martinez in connection with his verification request. The line went silent for several seconds before Kim asked him to repeat the subject's full name and the nature of his inquiry. Sarah Martinez, Torres explained, spelling out each letter while Kim's keyboard clicked rapidly in the background. We need standard background verification for someone who's been on base for several days. Kim's typing stopped abruptly, followed by another extended pause that made Torres wonder if their connection had failed. Major, Kim said carefully, that file requires kernel-level access authorization. I strongly suggest you proceed with extreme caution regarding this individual. The warning struck Torres as completely disproportionate to a routine personnel check, but Kim's tone carried unmistakable urgency that prevented further questions. Torres thanked her and hung up, staring at his notes while processing the implications. In 15 years of military service, he'd never encountered access restrictions that prevented basic verification of someone's presence on his own installation. Chen's obsession with Martinez reached dangerous new levels that afternoon when he spotted her entering the supply depot. He'd spent the morning organizing surveillance among junior enlisted soldiers, convincing 3 privates that Martinez posed a genuine security threat requiring constant monitoring. Armed with their support and his growing conviction, Chun decided the time had come for decisive action. Martinez moved systematically through the depot aisles, examining inventory records with a methodical attention of someone conducting official business. Chun approached from behind with deliberate stealth, waiting until she was isolated near the back storage area before making his move. His confidence surged as he prepared to finally expose what he believed was an elaborate deception. "You need to stop right there," Chun commanded, grabbing Martinez's arm with enough force to spin her around. His fingers closed tightly around her bicep as he pulled her toward him, his face inches from hers as he made his demands. "I want to see identification right now, and don't try to run because I have people watching all the exits." Martinez looked down at Chen's hand gripping her arm, then met his eyes with calm composure that should have warned him about the magnitude of his mistake. She reached into her breast pocket with her free hand and produced a standard military identification card, holding it where Chun could clearly read every detail. The laminated surface reflected the overhead lighting as Chun examined the information printed across its face. Colonel Sarah Martinez stared back at Chun from the official photograph, her rank clearly indicated by the silver eagles displayed prominently beneath her name. The card showed all proper military formatting with current expiration dates and security features that proved its authenticity. Chun studied the identification for several seconds, his grip loosening slightly as he processed what he was seeing. "Obviously fake," Chun declared, though his voice lacked its previous certainty. "Anyone can print up fake identification these days. The eagles don't look right, and the formatting seems off." He tightened his grip on Martinez's arm again, determined not to be fooled by what he perceived as an elaborate forgery designed to support her impersonation. Supply Sergeant Williams witnessed the entire confrontation from his position near the inventory desk. He'd been military for 22 years and immediately recognized genuine Colonel Eagles when he saw them. The identification card displayed all the proper security features and official formatting that marked authentic military credentials, making Chen's accusations appear increasingly unhinged. Martinez maintained her composure throughout Chen's physical detention, neither resisting his grip nor showing any sign of distress. Her calm reaction suggested someone accustomed to maintaining dignity under pressure, though Williams noticed the dangerous glint in her eyes that indicated Chun was pushing his luck far beyond reasonable limits. After examining the identification card again, Chun released Martinez's arm and stepped back, though his expression remained skeptical. "I'm reporting this to security," he announced. "They could determine whether this identification is legitimate or just another piece of evidence in your impersonation scheme." Martinez pocketed her ID without comment and resumed her inventory review as if the confrontation had never occurred. Captain Torres contacted Fort Davidson's security office that afternoon, requesting comprehensive background verification for Martinez. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes answered personally. His interest immediately piqued when Torres mentioned the subject's name and described the ongoing situation. Barnes had been reviewing surveillance footage all morning, noting Martinez's unusual access patterns and the growing tension surrounding her presence. The security footage revealed Martinez moving through restricted areas with obvious familiarity, her bearing and behavior consistent with someone possessing legitimate authority. Barnes also noticed Chen's increasing harassment and realized the situation was developing toward a potential crisis that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. Civilian contractor Janet Walsh spent her lunch break researching military patches online, driven by nagging recognition about Martinez's torn insignia. Her search eventually led to declassified special operations reports that mentioned a Phoenix call sign in connection with Medal of Honor recipients. The fragments of information suggested someone with extraordinary military credentials, though the classified nature of most details prevented complete verification. Chun gathered his 3 recruited privates for an evening briefing about Martinez's continued presence on base. He described her as a sophisticated infiltrator who had somehow obtained fake identification and was conducting surveillance for unknown purposes. His paranoid theories about her activities convinced the junior soldiers that they were participating in legitimate security operations rather than harassment. The stage was set for escalation as multiple investigation threads converged toward an inevitable confrontation. Chen's delusions drove him toward increasingly aggressive action, while institutional awareness of Martinez's true status began penetrating the command structure. The collision between Chin's misconceptions and emerging reality promised consequences that would reshape Fort Davidson's operations in ways no one could yet anticipate. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes spent Friday morning tracing Martinez's access credentials through the base security database, following each authorization code back to its origin point. The digital trail led him through increasingly restricted servers until he reached Pentagon-level authorization that required clearances far above his own access level. His computer screen displayed warning messages about unauthorized attempts to access classified personnel information, forcing him to abandon the search before triggering security alerts. The revelation that Martinez's credentials originated from the highest levels of military command sent Barnes reaching for his secure telephone. His contact at Defense Personnel confirmed that such authorization levels were reserved for individuals conducting sensitive operations that required complete institutional cooperation. The implication struck Barnes like cold water as he realized Fort Davidson was hosting someone whose authority extended far beyond normal military hierarchy. Staff Sergeant Jackson was performing pre-flight checks on his aircraft when Martinez walked past the flight line that afternoon. Something about her profile triggered a memory from his previous assignment at MacDill Air Force Base, where he'd attended classified briefings about special operations personnel. Her face seemed familiar from photographs shown during those sensitive discussions about Medal of Honor recipients and their ongoing missions. Jackson abandoned his checklist and placed an immediate call to his former unit commander, Major Collins, who had conducted those classified briefings 18 months earlier. Collins answered from his new assignment at Joint Special Operations Command, his voice becoming serious when Jackson described Martinez's appearance and current location at Fort Davidson. "That's Colonel Sarah Martinez," Collins confirmed without hesitation. "Call sign Phoenix. Medal of Honor recipient for actions in Afghanistan. If she's at Fort Davidson, she's conducting official business at the highest levels of authorization." Collins paused before adding a warning that made Jackson's blood run cold. Anyone interfering with her mission would face consequences extending all the way to the Pentagon. Captain Torres received an urgent call from Major Kim at base personnel just as he was preparing to leave for the weekend. Kim's voice carried barely controlled panic as she delivered information that transformed Torres's understanding of the entire situation. "Martinez's file is flagged for VIP status," Kim explained rapidly. "Any inquiry about her presence requires immediate notification to command headquarters. You should have contacted the base commander immediately." The weight of Torres's oversight settled on him like lead as Kim continued her urgent briefing. Martinez was conducting an unannounced inspection tour for Pentagon officials, her presence at Fort Davidson part of a broader assessment program that could affect the installation's operational status. Torres realized that Chin's harassment campaign had been targeting someone with authority to shut down the entire base. Chun spent his afternoon break convincing 3 junior soldiers that Martinez represented a genuine security threat requiring immediate action. He painted elaborate theories about foreign infiltration and sophisticated impersonation schemes designed to gather intelligence about Fort Davidson's operations. The privates listened with growing alarm as Chun described Martinez's suspicious behavior and her possession of obviously forged identification. "You can't trust anything about this woman," Chun declared with passionate conviction. "She's been conducting surveillance for days while pretending to be a colonel. Tonight, during evening chow, we're going to detain her properly and turn her over to real security personnel who can handle foreign agents." The 3 soldiers nodded their agreement, convinced they were participating in legitimate counterintelligence operations. Martinez's visit to the base commander's office building that afternoon created another moment of recognition among observant personnel. She passed through the security checkpoint without escort, her access credentials triggering automatic clearance from guards who recognized high-level authorization codes. The sergeant at the front desk watched her navigate the building with obvious familiarity, noting her confident movement toward offices that required special clearance. Base Commander Colonel Williams was attending meetings in Washington when his aide, Sergeant First Class Adams, recognized Martinez from classified briefings he'd attended the previous year. Adams immediately placed an emergency call to Williams, his voice tight with urgency as he reported Martinez's presence on the installation. "Sir, we have a problem," Adams began carefully. "Colonel Martinez is here conducting an unannounced inspection." Williams felt his stomach drop as Adams provided details about Martinez's mission and the growing situation involving Staff Sergeant Chen. The implications of harassment directed toward a Pentagon inspector conducting readiness assessment struck Williams like a physical blow. He ordered Adams to begin damage control procedures while he arranged immediate transportation back to Fort Davidson. Private Rodriguez was cleaning equipment near the NCO club when he overheard fragments of Chen's conversation with his recruited allies. Chen's voice carried clearly through the evening air as he outlined his plan to physically detain Martinez during dinner service. Rodriguez caught enough details to understand that Chen intended to use force if necessary, his obsession having evolved into something that sounded genuinely dangerous. The pieces of a brewing catastrophe scattered across Fort Davidson like tinder waiting for ignition. Multiple investigation threads had confirmed Martinez's legitimate authority and sensitive mission, while Chen's paranoid delusions drove him toward a confrontation that would destroy careers and potentially shut down the entire installation. The collision between institutional recognition and individual obsession promised consequences that would echo through the military chain of command for months to come. Martinez completed her systematic assessment of Fort Davidson's operations, her comprehensive notes documenting numerous deficiencies in security protocols and recognition procedures. The torn patch in her quarters served as physical evidence of the systematic failures she would report to Pentagon officials. Her quiet professionalism masked growing concern about the harassment she'd endured and its implications for military discipline across the installation. Colonel Williams answered his aide's emergency callback while rushing through the corridors of the Pentagon, his briefcase bouncing against his leg as Sergeant Adams delivered details that made his blood pressure spike. "Martinez is conducting an inspection tour for Pentagon officials," Adams reported with barely controlled urgency. "She's been on base for 3 days, documenting everything from security protocols to personnel management procedures." The implications hit Williams like artillery fire as he processed the magnitude of what Adams was describing. An unannounced Pentagon inspection represented the most serious form of institutional evaluation, capable of ending careers and shutting down installations based on the inspector's findings. The fact that Martinez had been subjected to harassment during her assessment created a crisis that could destroy Fort Davidson's operational status. Williams immediately contacted division headquarters from his Pentagon office, demanding direct access to General Hartley regardless of the general's current schedule. Within minutes, Hartley's aide patched Williams through to the general's secure line, where Williams delivered a rapid briefing about the developing catastrophe at his installation. "Sir, we have a critical situation involving Colonel Martinez and potential interference with her inspection mission." General Hartley's response chilled Williams to the bone as the full scope of Martinez's authority became clear. "Colonel Martinez is conducting an unannounced readiness assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff," Hartley explained with deadly seriousness. "Her mission involves evaluating base security, personnel management, and institutional response to stress situations. Any interference with her assessment constitutes a direct challenge to Pentagon authority." The Pentagon liaison officer confirmed details that made Williams' situation even more precarious. Martinez possessed authority to recommend immediate operational suspension if her assessment revealed significant institutional failures. The harassment she'd endured would certainly qualify as a major breakdown in military discipline and security awareness, potentially justifying the most severe administrative consequences. Williams arranged emergency transportation back to Fort Davidson while coordinating crisis management procedures with Pentagon officials. His installation faced potential shutdown based on Martinez's assessment, and the continuing harassment by Chun threatened to escalate the situation beyond any possibility of damage control. The flight back to base became a race against time to prevent complete institutional collapse. Meanwhile, Chun gathered his 3 recruited soldiers outside the mess hall as evening chow service began. His confidence had reached dangerous levels as he outlined their mission to physically detain Martinez and expose what he believed was an elaborate infiltration scheme. The privates listened nervously as Chun described their roles in surrounding Martinez and preventing her escape during the confrontation. "She's gotten away with this deception for too long," Chun declared with passionate conviction. "Tonight we end this charade and show everyone what real security looks like." The 3 soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, recognizing that Chen's plan involved significant risk, but lacking the experience to understand the catastrophic magnitude of what they were about to attempt. Captain Torres spent the afternoon desperately trying to reach Chun by radio, hoping to warn him about Martinez's true status before the situation spiraled completely beyond control. His attempts to contact Chun met with silence, as the staff sergeant had deliberately turned off his radio to avoid interference with his detention plan. Torres's growing panic drove him to contact base security directly, requesting immediate intervention to prevent a disaster. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes monitored multiple developing situations simultaneously through the base surveillance system. His screens displayed Chen's gathering of armed soldiers, Martinez's routine approach to the mess hall, and Torres's frantic attempts to coordinate intervention. The convergence of events suggested an imminent crisis that would require immediate response from all available security personnel. Barnes activated emergency protocols that placed all security teams on high alert while maintaining surveillance of Chen's movements. The staff sergeant's behavior had crossed from harassment into potentially criminal territory, requiring careful coordination to prevent violence while protecting Martinez from further assault. Barnes prepared to mobilize all available resources the moment Chen made his move. Janet Walsh completed her research about Phoenix call sign that afternoon, confirming through multiple sources that Martinez was indeed a Medal of Honor recipient with extraordinary military credentials. Her discovery prompted an immediate call to her corporate headquarters, warning them about the potential presence of a high-level Department of Defense inspector conducting assessment operations at Fort Davidson. The corporate response validated Walsh's concerns as her supervisors confirmed that DoD inspectors possessed authority to evaluate contractor performance and recommend termination of service agreements. Martinez's presence meant that every aspect of Fort Davidson's operations, including civilian support functions, faced potential scrutiny that could result in contract cancellation and immediate personnel replacement. Chen's obsession reached its culmination as he positioned his soldiers around the mess hall entrance, their nervous energy reflecting the magnitude of what they believed they were about to accomplish. His delusions about foreign infiltration and sophisticated impersonation had evolved into absolute conviction that justified any action necessary to expose Martinez's deception. The multiple threads of institutional awareness and individual obsession converged toward an inevitable collision that would determine Fort Davidson's future. Pentagon officials prepared for crisis management, while Chun initiated his final confrontation with someone whose authority extended to the highest levels of military command. The stage was set for a catastrophe that would reshape the installation's operations and destroy the careers of everyone involved in harassing a Medal of Honor recipient conducting official assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Martinez entered the mess hall for what would become the most consequential dinner service in Fort Davidson's history. Her quiet dignity masking awareness that her inspection had documented failures requiring immediate corrective action. The torn patch in her pocket would serve as evidence of institutional breakdown that justified the harshest possible administrative response. General Hartley's emergency response mobilized with devastating efficiency as he coordinated immediate deployment to Fort Davidson from his Pentagon office. 2 additional general officers, Morrison and Wilson, received urgent summons to join the crisis response team within minutes of Hartley's assessment of the situation. Their helicopter escort was airborne before most Fort Davidson personnel realized the magnitude of what was unfolding at their installation. Colonel Williams raced through Washington traffic toward Joint Base Andrews while maintaining constant communication with Pentagon crisis management officials. His secure radio crackled with updates about Martinez's mission status and the escalating harassment situation that threatened to destroy his career and shut down Fort Davidson permanently. The flight back to base became a desperate attempt to arrive before Chen's obsession triggered irreversible consequences. Division Chief of Staff Colonel Barnes began preliminary investigation into Fort Davidson's security protocols from his headquarters office, pulling personnel files and incident reports that would form the foundation of formal charges against multiple individuals. His initial assessment revealed systematic failures in recognition procedures and command oversight that would require comprehensive institutional restructuring to address. The mess hall buzzed with typical Friday evening activity as Chun positioned his 3 recruited soldiers at strategic points near the entrance and serving line. His confidence reached dangerous heights as he surveyed the crowded room, convinced that tonight's operation would vindicate his suspicions and expose Martinez's elaborate deception. The privates shifted nervously at their assigned positions, recognizing the gravity of what Chun had planned, but lacking experience to understand its catastrophic implications. Martinez entered the mess hall through the main entrance, her bearing calm and professional as she approached the serving line with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout her inspection. Chun watched her progress across the room, his anticipation building toward the moment when he would finally prove his theories about foreign infiltration and sophisticated impersonation schemes. Chun stepped forward as Martinez collected her meal tray, his voice carrying across the immediate area with unmistakable authority and accusation. "You need to stop right there," he announced loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear clearly. "We know what you're really doing here, and your espionage operation ends tonight." The mess hall conversations faltered as diners turned toward the developing confrontation. His accusations escalated as Martinez turned to face him with characteristic composure. "You've been conducting surveillance of this installation while impersonating a military officer," Chin declared, gesturing dramatically toward his positioned soldiers. "I'm placing you under citizen's arrest for unauthorized base access and potential espionage activities. Submit yourself for detention immediately or face the consequences of resisting lawful apprehension." Martinez regarded Chun with steady eyes, her voice calm and measured as she declined his demand. "I will not be submitting to detention, Sergeant." Chen's face flushed with anger as his authority was challenged in front of the assembled crowd. His delusions about legitimate security operations drove him toward the point of no return as he signaled his 3 soldiers to move into position. The privates approached reluctantly, forming a loose circle around Martinez, while hundreds of diners watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. Chen's confidence swelled as his plan reached its culmination, convinced that physical detention would finally expose Martinez's deception and vindicate his theories about infiltration. The mess hall fell completely quiet as the confrontation reached its critical moment. Private Rodriguez abandoned his position at a nearby table and rushed toward the developing crisis, his instincts screaming that Chun was making a catastrophic mistake. "Sergeant, you need to stop this immediately," Rodriguez called out desperately. "That woman is actually Colonel Martinez, a Medal of Honor recipient. You're about to destroy your career and everyone else involved in this situation." Chen's dismissal came swift and brutal as he turned his fury toward Rodriguez's intervention. "Get back to your table and stay out of security operations," Chun snapped. "This infiltrator has convinced you with her deception, but I won't be fooled by fake identification and stolen credentials." He gestured toward his soldiers with growing authority. "Escort her to detention while I contact real security personnel who understand the threat we're facing." Base security monitoring systems detected the escalating confrontation through multiple camera angles, triggering automatic alerts that brought Lieutenant Colonel Barnes rushing toward the mess hall with all available personnel. Emergency radio traffic exploded across base frequencies as security teams received reports about a general officer in distress and potential violence against Pentagon inspection personnel. The radio chatter reached critical mass as dispatchers coordinated response from multiple units simultaneously. All available security personnel report to mess hall immediately, the base operator announced across emergency frequencies. General officer requires immediate assistance with hostile personnel situation. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Chen's final order to his soldiers marked the point of no return as institutional crisis response collided with his delusional conviction about exposing foreign agents. Take her to the detention facility now, he commanded with desperate authority. I'll handle the paperwork and coordinate with proper authorities who can deal with sophisticated espionage operations. The three privates hesitated as they recognized the magnitude of what Sean was demanding. The mess hall transformed into the epicenter of a base-wide emergency as hundreds of personnel witnessed Chen's attempt to physically detain a Pentagon inspector conducting official assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Emergency alarms began sounding throughout Fort Davidson as the collision between individual obsession and institutional authority reached its devastating climax, promising consequences that would reshape the installation forever. The three soldiers Chun had recruited stared at Martinez with growing unease as she maintained perfect composure despite their threatening positions around her. Her complete lack of resistance or panic struck them as profoundly wrong. Not the reaction of someone caught in criminal activity, but the calm confidence of someone possessing legitimate authority. The privates exchanged uncertain glances while Chun urged them forward with increasingly desperate gestures. Martinez spoke clearly enough for the entire mess hall to hear as she identified herself with unmistakable dignity. I am Colonel Sarah Martinez, Medal of Honor recipient, conducting an official Pentagon inspection of this installation. Sergeant Chun, you're interfering with a mission authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The formal military bearing in her voice carried absolute authority that made several nearby diners instinctively straighten in their seats. Chen's laughter echoed across the silent mess hall as he dismissed Martinez's identification with manic conviction. That's exactly what a sophisticated infiltrator would claim, he declared triumphantly. You've studied our procedures and prepared elaborate cover stories, but I won't be deceived by psychological operations designed to confuse legitimate security personnel. His confidence surged as he interpreted her claim as confirmation of his theories about foreign intelligence operations. Two of the three recruited soldiers stepped back from Martinez as the magnitude of the situation became clear to them. The genuineness of her military bearing and the specific details of her identification suggested someone with real authority rather than an imposter. Private Johnson shook his head when Sean ordered him to restrain Martinez, recognizing that he was being asked to assault a potential general officer. Chen's fury exploded when his soldiers refused to follow his commands, leaving him isolated in his delusion while institutional reality closed in around him. Fine, I'll handle this myself, he snarled while pulling handcuffs from his belt. He approached Martinez with determined aggression, convinced that physical detention would finally prove his theories and vindicate his actions over the past week. The moment Chen's hands made contact with Martinez to apply restraints, base security burst through the mess hall entrance with Lieutenant Colonel Barnes leading the response team. Barnes witnessed Chun in the act of handcuffing a calm woman who matched the description of the Pentagon inspector, instantly recognizing the catastrophic nature of what he was observing. Emergency protocol, he barked into his radio. All units to mess hall immediately. The first helicopter touched down on Fort Davidson's landing pad as Chun struggled with Martinez's handcuffs, his desperation driving him toward actions that would destroy his career and potentially shut down the installation. Radio chatter exploded across base frequencies as air traffic control reported the arrival of general officer aircraft with emergency priority clearance. General Hartley and General Morrison emerged from their helicopter with grim expressions that reflected the seriousness of the crisis they'd been summoned to address. Their rapid deployment from Pentagon headquarters sent shockwaves through Fort Davidson's command structure as word spread about three-star general involvement in whatever was happening at the mess hall. Base communications erupted with reports that made every soldier on Fort Davidson understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. Three-star generals inbound, repeated across multiple frequencies as personnel throughout the installation received emergency orders to remain at their duty stations. The arrival of Pentagon officials created a base-wide crisis that suspended normal operations immediately. Chun completed his application of handcuffs to Martinez's wrists while Barnes and his security team surrounded the scene. The stark image of a staff sergeant restraining someone with obvious officer bearing created a tableau that would haunt Fort Davidson's reputation for years to come. Chen's triumphant expression reflected his conviction that he'd successfully exposed a major security threat. The weight of his actions began penetrating Chen's delusion as emergency sirens wailed across the installation and radio traffic indicated general officer involvement in his detention operation. His confidence faltered slightly as he recognized that his simple security action had triggered institution-wide crisis response that seemed disproportionate to arresting a single infiltrator. Barnes keyed his radio with barely controlled urgency as he reported the scene to incoming command authority. Security to base command. Colonel Martinez is in custody by unauthorized personnel. Repeat. Pentagon inspector is being detained by Staff Sergeant Chun against direct orders. Request immediate intervention by command authority to prevent further escalation of this crisis situation. The mess hall became the epicenter of institutional catastrophe as hundreds of witnesses observed Chen's restraint of Martinez, while general officers approached to assess the damage. Emergency protocols suspended all base operations as Fort Davidson's command structure mobilized to address the consequences of harassment directed toward a Medal of Honor recipient conducting official Pentagon assessment. Chun stood amid the chaos with Martinez in handcuffs, finally beginning to comprehend that his week-long crusade had triggered consequences extending far beyond his ability to control or understand. The collision between his delusional conviction and institutional reality promised to destroy not only his career, but potentially the operational status of the entire installation he believed he was protecting. Martinez maintained her dignity despite the physical restraints, her calm observation of the developing crisis providing evidence of the systematic failures she would document in her comprehensive assessment report. The torn patch and subsequent harassment would serve as primary examples of institutional breakdown requiring immediate corrective action from the highest levels of military command. The thunderous roar of helicopter rotors overhead announced the arrival of Pentagon authority as Generals Hartley, Morrison, and Wilson approached Fort Davidson's mess hall with expressions that promised consequences beyond anything the installation had ever experienced. Emergency vehicles surrounded the building while base personnel throughout the installation received lockdown orders that suspended all normal operations indefinitely. Three-star general officers entering an active crisis scene created an unprecedented situation that froze every soldier in the mess hall with paralyzing awareness that their careers hung in the balance. The assembled diners sat motionless at their tables, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing events that would reshape Fort Davidson forever. Conversations died completely as the weight of general officer authority filled the room. Chin stood in the center of the mess hall with Martinez still in handcuffs, his confidence beginning to crack as he processed the magnitude of institutional response his detention operation had triggered. The arrival of three generals suggested consequences far beyond what should result from exposing a single infiltrator, forcing him to confront the possibility that his assumptions might be catastrophically wrong. General Hartley entered through the main entrance with Morrison and Wilson flanking him, their synchronized movement and grim expressions commanding absolute attention from every person present. The silence became so complete that individual heartbeats seemed audible as 300 personnel witnessed the highest military authority directly engage with Chen's detention of Martinez. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes immediately approached the generals to provide situation briefing, his voice tight with professional urgency as he reported the details that had brought Pentagon officials to Fort Davidson. "Sir, Staff Sergeant Chun has detained Colonel Martinez despite repeated warnings about her identity and mission status. The situation has escalated beyond base-level resolution capabilities." Chen's world began collapsing as he heard Martinez formally identified as a colonel by security personnel, but his week-long conviction about infiltration prevented him from accepting what every other person in the room recognized as obvious truth. His delusions had become so entrenched that even direct confrontation with three-star generals couldn't immediately penetrate his certainty about exposing foreign agents. General Hartley approached Chun with measured steps that carried absolute authority, his voice cutting through the silence like artillery fire. "Staff Sergeant Chun, I am General Hartley from Pentagon headquarters. You will release Colonel Martinez immediately and explain your actions in detaining a Pentagon inspector conducting official business authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The formal identification of Martinez as a Pentagon inspector sent shock waves through Chen's remaining certainty as he struggled to reconcile his theories with institutional reality. General Morrison positioned himself where he could document the scene, while General Wilson coordinated with base security to ensure all evidence was properly preserved for the investigation that would certainly follow. Chen's attempt to justify his actions revealed the depth of his delusion as he addressed three-star generals with explanations that sounded increasingly unhinged. "Sir, this individual has been conducting surveillance operations while impersonating military personnel," he declared with desperate conviction. "I've documented multiple security violations and believe she represents a significant threat to installation security that required immediate detention." The handcuffs on Martinez's wrists provided stark physical evidence of institutional failure that would feature prominently in Pentagon reports about Fort Davidson's breakdown in military discipline and recognition protocols. Her calm dignity throughout the ordeal demonstrated the professionalism expected of Medal of Honor recipients while highlighting the catastrophic nature of Chen's harassment campaign. General Hartley's order carried the weight of absolute military authority as he commanded Chen's immediate compliance. "Release Colonel Martinez now, Sergeant." That is a direct order from three-star general authority. You are interfering with a Pentagon mission of the highest classification level, and your continued resistance constitutes insubordination of the most serious nature. Chen's hands trembled as he produced the handcuff keys, his delusions finally beginning to crack under the pressure of direct general officer involvement. The week-long certainty that had driven his harassment campaign crumbled as he recognized that three Pentagon generals would not mobilize to protect a foreign infiltrator. His theories about sophisticated impersonation collapsed as institutional reality overwhelmed his capacity for denial. Martinez rubbed her wrists as the restraints were removed, her composure intact despite the physical detention she'd endured. General Wilson documented her condition, while Morrison coordinated the wider investigation that would examine every aspect of Chen's behavior over the previous week. The systematic harassment of a Pentagon inspector represented institutional failure, requiring comprehensive corrective action. Base Commander Colonel Williams burst through the mess hall in trance as the handcuffs came off Martinez, his face ashen as he witnessed the aftermath of the crisis that would end his career and potentially close his installation. His arrival coincided with Martinez beginning her formal report to the assembled general officers about the systematic failures she'd observed throughout her inspection. The mess hall became a crime scene as General Hartley declared all personnel present to be material witnesses requiring formal statement collection. Emergency lockdown protocols expanded throughout Fort Davidson as the investigation encompassed every aspect of base operations and command structure. Normal activities ceased completely as the institution mobilized to address consequences extending far beyond Chen's individual actions. 200 soldiers sat frozen at their tables as they processed the magnitude of what they'd witnessed, understanding that Chen's detention of a Medal of Honor recipient conducting Pentagon inspection would haunt Fort Davidson's reputation indefinitely. The institutional failure, represented by his harassment campaign, promised changes that would affect every person on the installation for years to come. Martinez addressed the assembled generals with professional dignity that contrasted sharply with the chaos Chun had created through his obsessive harassment. My assessment has documented systematic failures in recognition protocols, security awareness, and command oversight that require immediate corrective action, she reported formally. The harassment I've endured demonstrates institutional breakdown at multiple levels that threatens operational readiness and military discipline. General Hartley's announcement reverberated through the mess hall with the force of institutional collapse as he declared immediate suspension of all Fort Davidson operations, pending comprehensive investigation. Effective immediately, this installation is non-operational until Pentagon review determines appropriate corrective measures, he stated with devastating authority. All personnel will remain at designated stations until released by investigating officers conducting formal interviews about this incident. The magnitude of institutional shutdown struck every soldier present as they processed the implications of complete operational suspension. 3,000 military personnel faced career uncertainty, while Pentagon investigators prepared to examine every aspect of Fort Davidson's command structure and security protocols. The harassment of a Medal of Honor recipient had triggered consequences extending far beyond anything the installation had previously experienced. Military police entered the mess hall within minutes of Hartley's declaration, approaching Chun with professional efficiency that brooked no resistance. Staff Sergeant Chun, you are under arrest for assault on a superior officer, interference with Pentagon operations, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, announced the lead investigator as restraints replaced the handcuffs Chun had used on Martinez. Multiple charges related to harassment and false reporting would follow as investigators examined his week-long campaign. Chen's removal from a mess hall marked the beginning of his complete downfall as military justice prepared to address his systematic harassment of Pentagon inspection personnel. His delusions about foreign infiltration provided no protection against charges carrying potential for reduction in rank, confinement, and dismissal from military service. The collision between individual obsession and institutional authority promised consequences that would destroy his career permanently. Colonel Martinez began her formal briefing to the assembled generals, providing comprehensive detail about the systematic failures she'd observed throughout her inspection mission. The harassment represents just one symptom of broader institutional breakdown affecting recognition protocols, security awareness, and command oversight, she reported with professional precision. Her assessment documented deficiencies requiring fundamental restructuring of base operations and leadership. The scope of Martinez's observations extended far beyond Chen's individual actions to encompass patterns of failure throughout Fort Davidson's command structure. Security protocols failed to protect Pentagon personnel from harassment. Recognition procedures proved inadequate for identifying authorized inspectors, and supervisory oversight allowed systematic misconduct to continue unchecked for multiple days. Her comprehensive report would reshape military policy regarding VIP protection and inspection procedures. Base communications exploded with emergency directives as the operational suspension cascaded through every department and unit on Fort Davidson. Normal training exercises ceased immediately, while administrative personnel scrambled to coordinate the logistics of housing and feeding 3,000 soldiers during extended lockdown. The institutional response created unprecedented disruption, affecting everything from family services to contract operations. Private Rodriguez provided his formal statement to Pentagon investigators, describing Chen's escalating harassment campaign and his own attempts to warn about Martinez's legitimate authority. His testimony documented the pattern of misconduct that multiple witnesses had observed but felt powerless to address through normal command channels. Rodriguez's intervention attempt during the final confrontation earned recognition for displaying proper military judgment under extreme pressure. Sergeant Mills faced intense questioning about his role in supporting Chen's harassment activities, his complicity in the systematic misconduct exposing him to potential charges and administrative action. Investigation teams examined his knowledge of Martinez's identity and his failure to intervene despite obvious signs that Chen's behavior had crossed professional boundaries. The institutional response extended consequences to all personnel who had participated in or enabled the harassment. Security footage review revealed the full extent of Chen's misconduct over multiple days, providing documentary evidence of harassment, physical confrontation, and false reporting that would support criminal charges and court-martial proceedings. The digital record captured Chen's escalating aggression and Martinez's professional restraint, creating an irrefutable timeline of institutional failure and individual obsession. General Wilson announced formal criminal investigation procedures that would examine Chen's actions through military justice channels, while Pentagon officials conducted broader institutional assessment. The charges against Chen included assault on a general officer, a crime carrying severe penalties under military law and representing one of the most serious offenses possible against military hierarchy and discipline. Base Commander Colonel Williams received immediate relief from duty as Pentagon investigators examined his failure to protect Martinez during her inspection mission. His career faced termination as institutional responsibility for the systematic harassment ultimately resided with command authority that had failed to maintain proper security and recognition protocols. The institutional collapse extended to leadership levels throughout Fort Davidson's structure. The formal declaration of Fort Davidson as non-operational pending institutional reconstruction created immediate crisis for military families and local community members dependent on base operations. Commissary services, medical facilities, and educational programs suspended operations while Pentagon officials determined appropriate corrective measures. The harassment of one Pentagon inspector had triggered consequences affecting thousands of people. Investigation teams established comprehensive evidence collection procedures that would examine every aspect of base operations relevant to Martinez's harassment and the institutional failures it represented. Witness interviews, document review, and policy analysis would continue for weeks as Pentagon officials prepared recommendations for preventing similar incidents throughout the military system. The three generals coordinated immediate crisis management while preparing reports that would reach the Joint Chiefs of Staff within hours of the incident. Martinez's assessment would influence military policy regarding inspector protection, recognition procedures, and institutional response to harassment. Her professional handling of systematic misconduct provided a model for maintaining dignity under extreme pressure. Chen's transport to military detention marked the symbolic end of his harassment campaign, while formal charges prepared the foundation for court-martial proceedings that would determine his fate. The collision between his delusional conviction and institutional reality had destroyed not only his career, but potentially the operational status of an entire military installation. Fort Davidson entered a period of institutional reconstruction that would require months of effort to address the systematic failures Martinez had documented. The harassment of a Medal of Honor recipient had exposed deficiencies requiring fundamental changes to military culture, security protocols, and leadership accountability throughout the installation and potentially across the broader military system. The formal court-martial charges against Chun arrived within 48 hours of his arrest, listing assault on a superior officer as the primary offense that would determine his fate in military justice proceedings. Additional charges included conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, false official statements, and interference with Pentagon operations. His potential sentence included reduction to the lowest enlisted rank, confinement for up to 3 years, and dishonorable discharge that would end his military career permanently. Captain Torres received official reprimand documentation that would stain his personnel record indefinitely, formally citing his failure to properly investigate VIP status and notify command authority about Martinez's presence on the installation. His oversight in allowing Chen's harassment to continue without intervention demonstrated negligence that violated basic security protocols for protecting Pentagon inspection personnel. The administrative action effectively ended his chances for promotion and future command assignments. The three soldiers who had participated in Chen's final confrontation faced varying degrees of disciplinary action based on their level of involvement and willingness to follow his illegal orders. Private Johnson, who had refused to restrain Martinez, received formal counseling about recognizing legitimate authority and reporting suspicious commands. The other two soldiers faced potential reduction in rank and extra duty assignments for their participation in attempting to detain a general officer. Fort Davidson's operational suspension created immediate hardship for 3,000 military families whose daily lives depended on base services and employment. Commissary closures forced families to shop at higher-priced civilian stores, while medical facilities redirected patients to overwhelmed community hospitals. School-age children faced educational disruption as base schools suspended operations pending institutional review and potential permanent closure. Local businesses that depended on Fort Davidson's economic impact suffered immediate revenue losses as base personnel received restrictions on off-base activities during the investigation period. Restaurants, retail stores, and service providers faced potential bankruptcy if operational suspension extended beyond several weeks. The harassment of one Pentagon inspector had triggered economic consequences affecting the entire surrounding community. Colonel Martinez completed her comprehensive assessment report during the 72 hours following her detention, documenting systematic institutional failures that extended far beyond Chen's individual misconduct. Her recommendations included potential base closure review due to fundamental breakdowns in security awareness, recognition protocols, and command oversight. The report would influence Pentagon policy regarding military installation standards and inspector protection procedures. General Hartley's briefing to Pentagon leadership characterized the Fort Davidson incident as catastrophic failure of recognition protocols that threatened military discipline throughout the service. His presentation emphasized the need for immediate policy changes to prevent similar harassment of inspection personnel and ensure proper protection for Medal of Honor recipients conducting official missions. The institutional response would reshape military culture regarding respect for authority and institutional accountability. Private Rodriguez received formal commendation for his attempt to prevent the final confrontation, recognizing his proper military judgment in trying to warn Chen about Martinez's legitimate identity and authority. His intervention during the crisis demonstrated the kind of moral courage expected from military personnel when witnessing potential violations of military law. The recognition included promotion recommendation and assignment to positions requiring enhanced responsibility and trust. Pentagon investigation teams expanded their examination beyond the immediate incident to encompass Fort Davidson's entire leadership structure and training protocols. Command failures that allowed systematic harassment to continue unchecked indicated broader institutional problems requiring comprehensive corrective action. The review would affect personnel assignments, training curricula, and operational procedures throughout the installation and potentially across similar military facilities. Military justice proceedings against Chun moved forward with unprecedented speed as Pentagon officials prioritized the case due to its implications for military discipline and respect for authority. His defense counsel faced the difficult task of explaining systematic harassment of a Medal of Honor recipient to military jurors who understood the severity of such conduct. The evidence included multiple witness statements, security footage, and Martinez's own testimony about the week-long campaign of misconduct. Base closure review committees began preliminary assessment of Fort Davidson's viability as an operational military installation, examining whether the systematic failures Martinez had documented could be adequately addressed through institutional reform. Alternative options included complete restructuring under new command authority or permanent closure with reassignment of personnel and mission to other installations. The decision would affect thousands of military careers and fundamentally reshape the local community. Administrative actions cascaded through Fort Davidson's command structure as investigation teams identified additional personnel whose negligence had enabled or failed to prevent Martinez's harassment. Officers and senior enlisted personnel faced career-ending consequences for their role in creating an institutional environment that allowed systematic misconduct to flourish unchecked. The accountability extended far beyond Chen's individual actions to encompass leadership failures at multiple levels. The institutional reckoning promised to continue for months as Pentagon officials implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar incidents throughout the military system. Martinez's professional handling of systematic harassment while maintaining her inspection mission provided a standard for dignified response to institutional failure, while Chen's court-martial would serve as a deterrent against future misconduct toward Pentagon personnel conducting official duties. 6 weeks after the institutional collapse, Fort Davidson reopened under completely restructured command authority that reflected Pentagon determination to prevent similar failures throughout the military system. The new base commander, Colonel Jennifer Walsh, arrived with specific instructions to implement comprehensive reforms addressing every deficiency Martinez had documented in her assessment report. Her first priority involved establishing recognition protocols that would protect inspection personnel from harassment while ensuring proper identification of legitimate authority. Mandatory recognition training became standard procedure for all military installations following Martinez's recommendations about institutional awareness and security protocols. The curriculum included specific instruction about Medal of Honor recipients, Pentagon inspection procedures, and the severe consequences of interfering with official assessment missions. Every soldier throughout the military system would receive annual training based on lessons learned from Fort Davidson's catastrophic failure. Chen's court-martial concluded with maximum penalties that reflected the severity of harassing a Medal of Honor recipient conducting Pentagon inspection duties. Military justice sentenced him to reduction from staff sergeant to private, 18 months confinement, and dishonorable discharge that would follow him for life. His systematic harassment campaign had destroyed his career while creating legal precedent about consequences for misconduct toward inspection personnel. The ripple effects of Chen's actions extended far beyond his individual punishment, as military justice established clear standards for protecting Pentagon officials from interference or harassment. Future cases involving similar misconduct would reference his court-martial as evidence of institutional commitment to maintaining proper respect for authority and mission accomplishment. His downfall served as powerful deterrent against challenging legitimate military hierarchy. Colonel Martinez's inspection report became the foundation for Army-wide policy changes that transformed recognition procedures and institutional accountability throughout the military system. Her comprehensive documentation of systematic failures led to enhanced protection protocols for inspection personnel and mandatory database verification before confronting unknown individuals on military installations. The reforms would prevent future incidents while improving overall security awareness. Private Rodriguez received promotion to sergeant along with assignment to Fort Davidson's new military police unit, where his demonstrated moral courage during the crisis qualified him for positions requiring enhanced responsibility and judgment. His intervention attempt during Chen's final confrontation earned recognition as the kind of leadership expected from professional soldiers when witnessing potential violations of military law and proper conduct. Fort Davidson's transformation included installation of a memorial honoring Medal of Honor recipients, with Colonel Martinez participating in the dedication ceremony that marked the institution's commitment to respecting military heroism and sacrifice. The memorial served as permanent reminder about the importance of recognizing legitimate authority while maintaining proper military bearing toward distinguished service members conducting official duties. New protocol requirements mandated database verification before any confrontation of unknown personnel on military installations, eliminating the possibility of harassment directed toward authorized visitors or inspection officials. The verification procedures included automatic notification to command authority when VIP personnel accessed base facilities, ensuring proper protection and coordination for sensitive missions requiring institutional cooperation and support. Pentagon officials conducted comprehensive follow-up inspection 3 months after Fort Davidson's reopening, finding complete transformation in base culture and operational procedures that validated the effectiveness of institutional reform. The inspection team noted dramatic improvements in security awareness, command oversight, and personnel recognition procedures that exceeded standards established for preventing similar incidents throughout the military system. The local community gradually recovered from economic disruption caused by base closure as normal operations resumed under improved management and enhanced civilian coordination. Business relationships stabilized, while Fort Davidson's new leadership emphasized positive community engagement that rebuilt trust damaged during the crisis period. The institutional reforms created lasting benefits extending beyond military boundaries. Martinez's professional handling of systematic harassment while maintaining inspection mission integrity became case study material for military leadership courses throughout the service. Her dignity under extreme pressure exemplified the standards expected of Medal of Honor recipients while demonstrating proper response to institutional failure and individual misconduct. Future officers would study her example as model behavior during crisis situations. The transformation of Fort Davidson from institutional failure to model installation demonstrated military capability for learning from catastrophic mistakes while implementing comprehensive reforms that prevented similar problems throughout the system. Chen's harassment campaign had inadvertently triggered improvements that strengthened military culture, enhanced security protocols, and reinforced respect for legitimate authority across all service branches. Years later, Fort Davidson remained a testament to institutional resilience and reform capability, with Chen's court-martial serving as permanent reminder about consequences of challenging legitimate military hierarchy. The installation's complete transformation validated Pentagon commitment to maintaining professional standards while protecting personnel conducting sensitive missions requiring absolute institutional cooperation and support.